pretty much all builders agree that the intonation of a guitar can never be perfect and that it's always a compromise. And everyone's used to the saddle being compensated, in other words, slanted on an acoustic guitar to give a little more length to the thicker strings, the bass strings. But since trying it, I've always found that compensating the nut end is actually a better compromise than doing the saddle alone. A few years ago I wanted to look into the issue, and so I built a rig that I call Gnasher, which allows me to measure for a particular string at a certain scale length and to give an action over a fretboard the amount of nut and saddle compensation that would give optimal intonation. This is the rig, or at least the skeleton of it. I'll go into a bit more detail in a minute, but basically every time I have an instrument with a new scale length, or with a different kind of string, or with a radically different playing action, then I will bring out this jig and use it and take some measurements to try and establish what my nut position will be and the slope on the saddle. So the jig has a bed which is long enough to take a bass guitar fretboard, and it has a fixed end where the ball end of the string goes, and it has a tuner on a movable carriage which can be positioned along a ruler at the desired scale length. And so for my present guitar, the scale length is 35mm, which is 25 inches, and I've set this carriage to that scale length. The main moving parts are what I call sliders. They're just shaped pieces of plywood with a piece of fret wire mounted on the top at an angle, and underneath there's a metal strip which is the width of a fret slot, so slides in a fret slot with no play. So there's one of these for the nut end, one for the saddle end, and the one for the saddle end goes in the slot in this carriage here. And I'll show you in a moment how this works. It's quite straightforward actually. If we pretend for a moment that this pencil is the string and it breaks over the fret here, which represents the saddle, and obviously is tuned up here to pitch using that tuning machine, you can see I can vary the break point by sliding this piece back and forth, so varying the effective length of the string. The nut end slider works exactly the same way, except that it's only 2.5mm of play, and it works in the other direction, moving the break point of the string forward from the nominal position, which is what you need for nut compensation. So this slider will be mounted in the 0 fret slot of my sawn fingerboard, and I'll show you it set up in just a moment. These other two pieces are built like sliders in that they've got the metal piece underneath to fit in a fret slot, but they don't slide. One of these goes in a low fret, I normally use the 2nd or 3rd, and the other one goes up in a high fret. I normally use fret 12 or 15, something like that. It doesn't really matter. and they also secure the fretboard down because they can be screwed down, and they hold the fretboard down onto the bed. Okay, so you can see the thing set up now with the string. It goes over the nut slider and the saddle slider at the 0 position, which means there's effectively no compensation at all. This is at the exact scale length of 635 millimeters. String is at pitch if I play the harmonic, and then I play the fretted note, 12th fret. It's very sharp, of course. That's with no compensation at all. So now let's try it with a couple of millimeters of just saddle compensation. I retune. That was the harmonic, fretted note now. Still sharp, but a bit less. Try it with 4 millimeters. Retune. Harmonic, a bit sharp still. That's bang on. Fretted note, still a bit sharp. Six millimeters. There we are. So effectively that's saying that with no nut compensation at all, this string would need 6 millimeters of saddle compensation. Now I'm going to go back to the nut end, which is actually, from experience now, what I normally start with. So that's the open string, first fret note is sharp, which is what you'd expect. So we need to move the nut slider there we go, 1 millimeter. Now if we go back to the saddle end, it's too flat, which means there's now too much compensation here. So there's an interplay between the nut and the saddle end, and this is what I found, that actually if you compensate the nut correctly, you need less compensation at the saddle end. So let's try and sort this out. So this is my final setting for this string. The saddle end 5.5 millimeters, the nut end 1 millimeter. All those notes are in tune. So for this, on this guitar, I think I'm going to try and do a rosette which goes all the way to the sound hole. So I'm just lining up the outside of that rosette with the last fret. Now I'm going to cut out the ring and put it over the wood to see where the best place to make the rosette is. Yeah, so with two separate attempts I've got the centre pretty much in the same place, so I think I know where the optimum figure is going to be for the rosette. So what I've done here is nearly cut out the rosette. I've scored the lines for the actual outside, but I've decided in the middle I'm going to put a thin layer of white, blue, white veneers just to set off the brown to make a nice contrast. So I've got a soldering iron here. I'm just going to wet the veneers and bend them into a rough curve so there's less risk of breaking. So to glue the veneer strip in, I need to get some glue in this very narrow channel here, and the StewMac whip tips, or whatever they're called, they're glue pipettes, which have a very thin tip, are great, but they're not exactly cheap over here in Europe by the time you paid shipping and import duty and all the rest of it. So here's a little trick I've discovered. You can buy these pipettes very cheaply indeed on Amazon, and if you warm them carefully, the tip, it will stretch into what is effectively a whip tip, and you can make it as thin or as thick as you like. And then just let it cool. And with a bit of practice you can make this tip actually really quite long, and you can keep cutting it off if and when it gets blocked. I don't need it super thin for this, it just needs to be thin enough to get in the channel I'm going to use. But a fraction too long. This joint won't actually show, but just as a matter of practice really, because when it does, it's good. You have to get it right, so you might as well practice when it doesn't matter. So I think that's going to look good. Here's the inside of the sound hole. So what I need to do now is make a recess in the top, which is exactly the depth of my rosette ring, so it will sit flush with the top wood. Actually slightly under the top wood, because this isn't sanded. It'll be easier to sand this than this, so I'll inset it ever so slightly. 3 perhaps. Yeah, so if I make the recess a little more than 2.3 millimeters, it should be about right. So now I'm going to use the inner disc to make sure that the outer one is properly centered on the hole. There's almost no play in this at all, because I cut it with the scalpel blade and not with the Dremel bit, so I can be pretty sure the ring is centered on the hole if I do it this way. And I'll just mark So now I've lined the blade up just on the inside of my pencil marks. I'm just going to score a line which I hope will make the Dremel cut of the recess clean edged. So there's the scored line. It might be a touch undersize, but it can be sorted out later. Right, so this is now a perfect fit. I'm very, very happy with it. The depth is exactly right. It's just a tiny fraction of a millimetre below the level of the top. The gap here looks like a mistake. It isn't, because of course the sound hole will be cut out, and in fact I'm going to cut the sound hole out of the top wood slightly larger than the inside diameter of this, so that eventually the top wood won't show on the side of the sound hole. I'll be able to chamfer it away, but it will be probably a millimetre or two inside the ring. So that's the next job, and I'm very glad I remembered to do it before gluing the ring down, because the temptation is now to get it glued in, but I have to cut the sound hole out first. Being so thin, this is very fragile of course, but once the walnut's glued on top, the whole area will be quite a lot stronger. nice. Very happy with that. Got too much glue here really, but better too much than too little in this kind of situation, I think. And I've cut out a couple of paper rings just slightly smaller than the walnut ring to put pressure down and keep it down below the level of the top wood. At least that's the theory. There, leave that overnight. Let's have a look at it. Yep, that's going to be fine. There's a little bit of overlap of the outer ring all the way around, which is what I wanted. So I'll sand on the inside, chamfer this off a bit, and then from the outside it'll be invisible. Well, that's it for this video. I hope you found it interesting. It's my first time trying this style of rosette, and I'm pleased with the way it turned out. In the next video, I'll be doing the braces on the top and the back plates, and you'll see me wasting some time doing something I don't need to do, but I'll keep that bit short. So until then, goodbye for now.